delighted to have Gary McLelland with us. He's Chief Executive, Humanists International UK. Welcome to Atheist Centre, Gary.
Thank you.
We are very happy to have you here to celebrate 80 years of Atheist Centre. Can you please tell us how positive atheism of Gora impacted you or influenced you?
I think, it's amazing to be here for the 80th birthday of the Atheist Centre, which is an amazing organisation. Unique around the world. I think that's quite an amazing achievement. Positive atheism and humanism has had a big impact on me throughout my life. I was raised in a religious family. My family were Catholic, and I spent most of my childhood as a Catholic, going to church. And the way it works where I come from in Scotland is the schools are dependent on your religion, so you go to a separate school if you're a Catholic. And when I became later on a teenager and I found out about atheism and humanism, then I started to challenge some of the religious beliefs I had. I ended up being an atheist. I didn't believe in God. And I think it really impacted me that despite having never been able to challenge my beliefs as a child, I was sent away to a separate school. I think that's really wrong. And I think that the positive message that Gora, other positive atheists and humanists, the message that they aspire, that you should self-determine. Self-respect is the phrase I've heard used. It's about self-respect for your own beliefs, your own journey, valuing your own intuition, and allowing yourself to think for yourself. I think that's an incredibly strong message, and I just wish it was something that I was taught when I was younger, and something I didn't have to find out for myself. So it's been an incredibly important thing for me in my ongoing life, and this has been a very excellent conference. But I heard one of the delegates at the conference this weekend who said he was 72 years old, but he's still learning. He's still on the journey of self-discovery, of self-actualization, of challenging his own views and things like that. And that really struck me, because I don't think many movements, many belief systems have that focus on continual growth and development and learning. And I think that's an incredibly positive thing to value, And I think for me, the one thing I notice the older I get is that I talk less and I listen more. And I think the process of getting older allows you to have a certain degree of reflection on the things you do know and also the things you don't know. So it's had quite a profound effect on me, I would say.
Where in one's life do you think this should start, as you have said?
I think before birth. My experience of being an atheist, being a humanist, having no religion, is something that initially was not very positive. I think I was talking earlier this weekend about I believed the things that the adults in my life told me, namely the religious ideas that there was a heaven that I would go to after I died. My grandparents, who I unfortunately never met in life, they died before I was born, that I would get to meet them, that no matter how difficult my life was, how hard it was, that I could always take refuge in the idea that there would be a heaven to go to and that everything was going to be good in the end. Now, as I now know, that's not true, and the adults in my life conspired to tell me that was true. And I don't necessarily blame them, because they were doing their job, they were doing what they thought was right for me, but the sense of loss that I felt at the age of 15, 16, 17, when all that was taken away from me, when the very idea of meeting my grandparents, for example, when that was taken away from me, that felt like a lot of loss, because everything I'd been taught as a child suddenly just evaporated, and that was a very difficult thing to come to terms with. So I think the process of self-determination, of self-discovery, of challenging your ideas has to happen, if not from birth, from much earlier. I would like everybody, parents who are bringing a child into the world, to be able to want to teach that child to think for themselves, to be curious, to be curious about everything, to be curious about the rules which govern us, how things work, how objects work, And I think that the curiosity that children naturally have is the beginning of the scientific temper, to quote words from the Indian Constitution. It's that very basis of wanting to understand how things work. And I think when you see children at play, you see that natural curiosity, and it's only the imposition of religious ideology which smothers it. And I remember being at school, at my Catholic school, and every week, or maybe not every month, we would go to Mass, and the priest would say the sermon, and we would stand up, sit down, kneel down, up, down, up, down, and we would just go through the rigmarole of it every month or so. And I remember thinking to myself, it's strange that the priest never asks for questions. Like he never gives a sermon and says, tell me what you think, or do you understand what I'm saying, or anything like that. Or you never get a chance to say, excuse me, why is this the way it is? And I asked my teacher, I said, why can't we ask the priest some questions? He says, this is the message of the Bible, blah, blah, blah. Why can't we ask questions? Oh, no, you can't do that, And it's not even explained, it's just a simple, that's ridiculous. This is not to be questioned, you have to believe it, all of it, and that's the end of the question. And religion is the only part of my school where that was the way it was. If I had a question about maths or science, you put my hand up and I would ask my question.
Maybe it's so because they say, blessed are those who do not question.
Yes, I think so. And I think that's exactly what the school wants to inculcate is, or the religion wants to inculcate is passive recipients of information.
Yeah. So in such a context, even in the contemporary times, do you think Gora is relevant in the present day?
Absolutely, yeah.
What aspect do you think is it that makes him relevant?
Well, I think one of the things, the phrase which keeps resounding in my head is self-respect, and I think that is a very important thing, because it's not just about having respect for, although this is important, having respect for your body, for your belief system and so on, but I think understanding that your personal thoughts and your journey about how you see yourself is important. Because I was talking today about the changes in demographics, so across Asia, across Europe, across America, more and more young people are not religious. So the number of religious people is declining slowly as basically older religious people pass away and new younger people who are more likely to be non-religious. And I was thinking that must be a good thing. But not necessarily, I think, because you can have a type of atheism or non-religious belief which is not democratic, it doesn't value equality, it doesn't have to do with inequality between rich and poor or social status. You could be non-religious but also be very selfish. You could be a totalitarian or a dictator or so on. So I think the message that Gora sends about positive atheism, it's not just to do with lack of religious belief, it's also to do with respecting yourself and other people, equality, helping people, building a strong society. I think that's the message which is important, because even if we throw away all of the damaging religious parts, we can't throw away the equality, democracy, the value of working together, being together. And I think finally the thing for me is I worry that a lot of young people nowadays don't value philosophy, like they don't value thinking about living the examined life, to quote a sort of philosophy phrase. It's important, I think, to reflect on your life, not just to live it day to day, but to sit back sometimes and say, am I doing what's right for me? Am I fulfilled as a person? Am I learning new things? Am I helping people? Am I making friends? And I think listening and reading some of the messages from Gora, I think that's one thing that we can continue to learn, is the importance of making connections with other people, being true to ourselves, living an examined life that we can be proud of.
So you think this is what that young people around the world need to do?
I think so, yeah. If we look at the challenges we're facing politically in India, China, United States, it's almost as though, and there was some surveys done in the country I live in, the UK, asking people, do you think we just need a strong leader to lead us and just follow the strong leader? And a surprising number of young people said yes, we need a strong leader that we can all follow. And then when asked, how important do you think democracy is? A relatively small percentage of the people said that it's very important. And I think that's what worries me, is because I think I certainly grew up, and I think the generations just before me grew up in a society where the importance of democracy was so embedded in everything that we did that we never stopped to examine why is democracy important, And then when you have the rise of China, probably maybe one of the most successful anti-democratic sort of capitalist societies, you think, well, democracy is not the only way to run a country. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, all methods of government are pretty rubbish, but democracy is the least bad. And I think that's true. So we have this challenge to democracy, to human rights, and also I think that the same argument goes for human rights. My parents and even my grandparents, they lived in the shadow of the World War II, where we saw atrocities, we saw genocide, dreadful, dreadful things happened. And out of that dreadful situation came these principles of human rights, which we put into law. And those basically said, governments, just like people, can be flawed. They can make terribly wrong decisions, and sometimes the power of your government has to be limited by certain fundamental laws, and they became the human rights laws. But increasingly young people, I think, across different societies are starting to challenge that assumption and say, well, if I elect my government, why can't they do anything they want? Why can't they kick out these people because we don't want them? We don't want these foreigners, or we don't want certain groups and things like that. And I guess the challenge for us is we then need to go back to basics and understand, okay, well, why do we need human rights, equality, democracy, all the values that Gora espoused? And I think if we have an atheism which is devoid of critical thinking, philosophy, understanding how to think, then we risk going the way that people in China have gone, where you can have a type of atheism which is completely devoid of democracy, equality, and so on. And I don't think that's the way we want to go. So I think that's why it's crucially important that we continue to promote the ideas of Gora, of positive atheism, humanism, the importance of relationships and equality between people and so on.
So, if I understood right, do you mean to say that positive atheism of Gora has clear-cut directives in the political branch as well?
Yes, I think so. And I think, all those of us around the world who follow the ideas of Gora and positive atheism and humanism, I think we may not agree precisely on the political solution to a problem. We may vote for different parties, we may favour different policies, but the one thing that we can be united about is the importance of democracy, equality, and the importance of being engaged in politics. And as far as I'm concerned, politics is everything. You cannot be a thinking person and not be political, because everything has a political dimension to it. And whilst we're seeing challenges to democracy around the world, whilst we still have democracy, we must engage in it. You must vote, you must get engaged in any different level you can, because people fought for our right to vote, and I think we have to defend it as well.
Yeah. What about when you talk about humanism, rational thinking? What do you think, or where do you think a common person can exert his or her influence in? Because we know many changes that take place in countries, they are systemic, and peaceful protests are a very powerful way of doing it. Nowadays, social media.
Yeah.
Is there any other way of doing these things?
Quite often small things that you can do make a difference. The one thing I always urge people to do is, if you live in an area where there's a humanist organisation or atheist centre or anything, get involved, join the organisation, volunteer, give your time, support them, because we are stronger together. And if you can lend your individual talents to an organisation to help echo its message, then I always recommend the best thing you can do is get together, join an organisation, and from that then you have the opportunity to protest, to write to your members of parliament and congress people and so on, and add your voice to those protests. But it's also, I think, important, this is one of the messages I've got very clear from this conference, and I think the Atheist Centre is also a personification of this idea, which is live out your values. You know, we just had, where I come from in the UK, we just had a general election, and we've had the past 3-4 years, we've had a political crisis going on between people who want to do one policy about the European Union and people who want to have another. Now, I don't have a view on that from a humanist point of view, but one of the things that the entire country was agreed about was that our political discourse had become really rough, very coarse, and you know, at some points, and especially for female politicians, had become unacceptably harassing, nasty. You know, people were getting a lot of abuse and threats and so on, and it was ugly. And I think the whole society agreed that we don't want to live in a country where we have this kind of political discourse. So the reaction to that is then live out the positive version of politics that you want to see. So treat people with respect. If somebody has a different point of view from you, something you strongly disagree with, still treat them nice as a person, don't shout at them. And I think one of the big reasons behind this coarsening of the language, and especially in the political sphere, is social media. So I think it's especially difficult when we are on social media to remember that the person that we're communicating with is another human. They're another human with a family, with friends, with hobbies, and you know, when you're getting angry at people online, to try and remember that they're a human being. So those are a few things that individuals can do, but really I would always recommend join your local organisation, support it, try and move them to do things that you want. Protests are always a good way to get people together, positive, peaceful protests, you know. Being in India, of course, it seems almost like a cliche to mention the importance of civil disobedience and resistance, but of course it's true, you know, and the example that Gandhi gave and other people gave from India around the world is something that people still cling to today.
So where do you see the future of these movements?
I think the future is bright for our movement. I mentioned today that from Humanists International, when we started in 1952, we had just a handful of organisations, of course one of them being from India. Humanists in India have been very powerful. I mentioned as well, India had the first humanist counsellors. Obviously the Atheist Centre was providing many social services and secular social work, and humanists in Europe and North America have learned from that a great deal and are now continuing to develop their own social services, which is very good. The future is bright. From that handful of organisations in 1952, if you fast forward about 50 years later, we had 100 organisations. Fast forward again another 20 years, we have 180 organisations in 80 countries around the world, which is an incredible movement, you know, and we don't know how many members each of our members has, but you know, we can say that there's millions, at least millions of people around the world who are actively involved in the humanist movement to make a difference, to make a progressive society, to make positive changes, and that's amazing. What we want to do from the international point of view is to help people realise that they are part of a global movement. So we want to have more interaction between the individual members of our organisations, more communications, make use of social media. You know, we're doing this interview on YouTube, so to make use of these technologies that can make people realise that humanists around the world have so much in common. And I think, although travelling is expensive, and of course with climate change we have to be mindful of our, you know, our air miles and so on, but from my point of view there's really no alternative to meeting people in person and realising the things that unite us and making friends across the world is a really positive thing. So I think the future is bright. The challenges we face though are significant, but I think we have to be true to our values. We have to remember, as much as people try and divide us between different religions, different castes, different communities and nationalities, we must remember that we are far more similar than we are different, and I hope that we can do that.
So what are the kind of challenges that you think we face?
Well, the big challenge is the rise that we're seeing in nationalism and populism. Of course, we see it in India, you know, the Hindutva, the BJP, this desire to see, you know, a homogenous view of what it is to be Indian, with this Hindu nationalism. And we see that in other parts of the world. You know, we see that, if you can say, in the United States with evangelical Christianity trying to impose this view that America is a Christian country, is a white Christian country, and all these different things. And to the same extent it's happening in the UK, you know, this continual discourse about being a Christian nation and so on. That is a worry, and I think we have to push against that. We have to support the idea of diversity, the fact that we are all different, and you know, we can be allowed to explore our differences and so on. But I think that the challenges of this populist movement are profound. I mean, I'm not a very, this isn't my theory, but from what I've read about the rise of populism that we're seeing in the last 5-10 years, most of it can be traced back to the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And what it seems is that every time there's a major global financial crash, such as what happened in the 1930s and so on and so forth, the reaction to that is a bit delayed, and the instability of the financial system completely crashing, and of course, you know, the tens of thousands of people that made homeless and so on, that causes societies to have a kind of insecurity, and when people feel that way, they want certainty, and this is when strongman politics and more you know, authoritarian type of politics can creep into our society. So if that analysis is true, and I don't know if it is, but this is what I read, if that's true, I think the challenge for us is hang on to the institutions that we have, hang on to the political institutions, hang on to the judiciary, to the United Nations, to everything, and try and see if we can overcome this kind of backlash of populism and nationalism. And I hope that if we can emerge from the other side of this populist trend with our institutions intact, you know, with our organisations intact, then hopefully there'll be enough pieces left to rebuild and continue on our arc of prosperity as we thought it was. So that's the hope, I think.
So what are the kind of activities that you take up on behalf of your organisation?
Humanists International, we have a very relatively small team, so we have about 5 or 6 members of staff, and we do 3 main things. We do campaigns, so we run the Freedom of Thought report, which is a report we produce every year. We've been doing that for, I think, 7 years now, and that report contains an analysis of every single country in the world. And we do that based on 4 criteria to try and examine how the situation is for atheists, humanists and non-religious people. So are their rights defended, are they treated equally, and so on and so forth. And in actual fact, the report we produced last year, India, I'm sorry to say, was in one of the top 7 countries of concern, noting the backlash from, you know, BJP activists. We recorded on the what do you call it, the sort of gangs of people who were attacking people who were eating cow meat, beef, and things like that. So there was a lot of things we're worried about in India. But that's the Freedom of Thought report is one project we do. We also have the End Blasphemy Laws campaign. So we run a campaign which coordinates all the countries in the world who have blasphemy laws to try and repeal those laws, to try and stand up for freedom of expression and belief. So that's the campaigns that we do. The other area that we do is representation at the United Nations and other global institutions. I think we've also had representation before at South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SARC, as well as places in America and the Council of Europe and so on. So we go there. Quite often we take activists with us to, you know, be the voice. So I think we've had V.B. Rawat. I don't know if he's actually spoken, but he's at least reported to us, you know, what's happening in India and in different places. So maintaining delegations at all these institutions and to try and put the voice forward for humanism and report, the human rights violations in those countries. And finally, one of the programs we have, which we're actually expanding this year, is our Growth and Development Project program. So that we give out in grants roughly £100,000 per year to different organisations, and the reason behind that is we want to help develop new organisations and support existing organisations to help them grow. So we give out grants of anywhere between £400 up to £20,000 to help them grow new projects, to hire staff, to do what they need to do to grow their organisation and help develop humanism in the region. And we primarily aim that areas where humanism is either less developed or underfunded. So in many countries in Europe, they're quite well funded because either they have a lot of members or they have money from the government. But in other countries it's difficult for humanists to raise money, so we try and distribute some of the wealth of the humanist movement.
With your experience in the humanist organizations in the UN, we would like to know, does the information really reach to those in power, like from the grassroots to the higher authorities?
I think the truth is that we do our best, and I know a lot of other organisations do their best, but it is very tricky, it's very difficult. These institutions like the United Nations, the European Union, so on, they are very, bureaucratic. So you have to have the right accreditation, forms, you have to be transparent, blah, 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 and be audited and so on. But the one thing I would say is they are the only institutions we have, and so we have to use them. And the way that we make sure that we are representing the grassroots is, well, I try as much as possible to travel to different meetings, to meet people, to hear their stories. We have Elizabeth, our Director of Communications. She travels a lot. She's traveling.
She's always with the people in the community.
Exactly. So she's traveling to places in Africa, Latin America. She was in India with me 2 years ago, and always on the move. And she meets activists there, and she talks to our members. Our members are in touch with us all the time about what's happening. I get WhatsApps from people, with videos, messages, and so on. So I think we are very well plugged into our movement, and we understand what's going on, and we are able to then report these messages to the United Nations through our statements and our questions and so on. But occasionally what we're very able to do is to actually bring activists from different countries to come to the United Nations. So the Human Rights Council takes place in Geneva, in Switzerland, and we can actually help bring people there to speak for themselves. In fact, one project we have coming up soon, which is to do with that, is I think last year we re-established our presence at what's called the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and that's basically similar to the Council of Europe, but for Africa. So it has a human rights mechanism that can challenge governments and so on, and people can go there and report human rights violations. Now, we started that by sending Elizabeth to go there and speak on behalf of members and so on. But we thought, well, hold on a minute. The African Commission is a wonderful organisation, and we have, I can't remember, let's say 50 organisations across Africa. We should get them to go there and speak for themselves. So what we're organising is we're actually funding a lot of groups from Africa to go to the Gambia, where the Human Rights Commission is, and we're going to train them on how to do advocacy, how to make speeches, how to write presentations and so on, and let them be the voice for their own movement, which I think is much better than us speaking for them. But the truth is that although I think we do very well in making sure that grassroots voices are represented, there's still much more that we could do. I mean, the Freedom of Thought report and our research into the non-religious movement, one of the things we say is that in many, many countries, the number of atheists are invisible. So, you think about countries like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Nigeria, so many countries. It can be so tricky to be an atheist in that country that it's much safer to just keep your head down and just be quiet and not say anything. So although we can represent the information that we have and what we know is that there's a lot of information we don't know. We don't know what what is it like to be an
Yeah.
atheist in Saudi Arabia? I don't know, because the very few brave people that have spoken out about it, they have not had a very easy time, you know. And
But in such issues, that's always there, no matter how work.
yes, yeah.
That's always, it's important that whatever we can do, whether we have done it to 100% within our
Yes.
capability is what
That
matters.
we try, exactly.
Yeah.
I agree
So
with you.
we really appreciate your efforts to bring that international forums.
I think in terms of making sure that the voices are heard at the Human Rights Council and other places, one of the considerations we have obviously is the fact that many countries which violate these human rights, such as Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, so on, they are actually members of the Human Rights Council, and that is very difficult for us, because on the one hand we are criticising these countries, but on the other hand they have some legitimacy because they are members of the Human Rights Commission, and that is a big problem. It's not a problem with an easy answer. As a movement, as a humanist movement, we have always supported multilateralism, and multilateralism is the theory that everybody must come to the table with all of our differences, with all of our disagreements, and it's from that basis of being together that we discuss how to move forward. And even if we think back to when the United Nations was first formed, it was in the grip of the Cold War, you know, where we had the Western powers and the USSR, you know, literally pointing nuclear weapons at each other, and we thought that the world could have been on the brink of disaster. Even in those times, we still managed to achieve multilateralism, you know, with America and Russia coming together at the United Nations. And I think, for me, the only way that we can continue to have these institutions is if we engage with multilateralism. It's always uncomfortable for us because, you know, very clearly we have evidence that these countries are gross violators of human rights, and very often they would like to use their positions within the United Nations to sort of whitewash themselves and present a clearer image. But we only do what we can to call these things out. One of the things that we do to try and combat this is with friendly governments that we have, so with governments in Europe and even to a certain extent in the United States, governments that have very active foreign policies, we'll often go to those governments and brief them on our concerns about what's happening in Bangladesh or Saudi Arabia or Mauritania or wherever it is, and we'll brief them with our concerns and say, look, if you're sending delegates there, if you're sending diplomats to go and talk about trade or whatever, a visa access, make sure you ask them, what about the atheists and the humanists and the LGBT activists, the women's rights activists, blah blah blah. Ask them, because they won't tell you if you don't ask them. And then once they tell you we don't have any, tell them yes you do, because we know they're there, and we need to know that you're protecting them, and that's a big problem. Of course, we publish in the Freedom of Thought report every year a list of countries which are gross violators of rights for atheists, humanists. As an interesting point, just as an aside to that for a moment, one of the interesting things that we notice is often humanists and atheists, and very often gay people, LGBT people, they are like the canary in the coal mine, if you understand. Like they are the test of human rights generally. If a country doesn't respect the rights of humanists, atheists, LGBT people, very often you're likely to see a complete decline in other human rights, because these tend to be some of the most vulnerable groups in society. The UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief has said that in the whole list of religions and beliefs, it's atheists and humanists that face the most violent type of persecution in countries around the world. So we know that the problem is real. But the other thing is, we've been asked before whether we shy away from naming the fact that most of the countries with these violations are Islamic majority states, and we've never shied away from that. If you read our reports, you can see quite clearly the countries on the top of that list are Muslim majority Islamic states. We never draw attention to it specifically because, for the very reason that we're not trying to say that this is a problem with individual Muslims or to try and make some sort of opposition between ideologies. It's true because any country run on a religious ideology will have these problems with this totalitarian attitude. It was true of European countries when they were run as Christian, fundamentalist countries, and it would be true of any country run.
It was even true post Second World War with US.
Yes.
The Puritans.
Yes, exactly,
isn't it?
exactly. So yes, it's very true. But at the moment, of the countries we see run in this sort of religious ideological way, they are Muslim countries, and the situation for minorities in those countries, for atheists, humanists, LGBT people, is appalling. And in actual fact, I don't really like talking about this because it tends to make me quite upset. One of the most humbling and difficult aspects of my job is the travelling bit is nice, meeting people, it's the best job in the world. What makes this job really difficult is the emails we get every day, and the emails we get from people in Pakistan, people in Saudi Arabia, even people who have managed to escape those countries but are now looking for asylum in Europe or wherever. And the messages you get, I was talking to somebody a few days ago who's in Pakistan, who's on trial, and I can't really say any more because we can't talk publicly about these cases, because it would actually be much more dangerous for them to be outed as atheists and humanists. But we have communication every day with these people who are either looking for some support, or they're simply looking for someone to acknowledge that they exist, because they live in a country or a society where they feel totally alone, and it breaks my heart, And of the 130 odd people that contacted us in the last 12 months for support, most of them we've been able to support, but there are a number who didn't make it, and the number of humanists and atheists that have been killed by their own governments or by vigilante mobs is tragic, really tragic.
With the future generations, I think more and more young people are being more liberal, secular and tolerant, so we hope that humanists, rationalists and atheists grow from strength to strength, and we wish a good and enjoyable stay for you here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your hospitality. It's been very kind.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
మరిన్ని కొత్త వీడియోల కోసం మా ఛానల్కి సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేయండి, క్రింద ఉన్న బెల్ ఐకాన్ని యాక్టివేట్ చేయండి.